On July 23, 1985, at Arlington Stadium, a rookie Texas Rangers center fielder did something no Ranger had done before. Oddibe McDowell hit for the cycle against Cleveland in an 8-4 Texas victory. A single, a double, a triple, and a home run, all in the same game. In a ballpark that would become part of his identity, wearing the unusual number 0, McDowell suddenly looked like more than a promising young player. He looked like someone the Rangers might build around. And yet, less than a decade later, his major league career would be over. Between those 2 points was a career filled with medals, awards, speed, defensive ability, memorable moments, and one increasingly difficult question. How could a player with that kind of beginning fail to find a lasting place in the game? To understand why McDowell's arrival felt so significant, you have to go back before Texas, before the Rangers, and even before Arizona State. At MacArthur High School in Hollywood, Florida, McDowell was a multi-sport athlete. In 1979, he won the Florida High School Activities Association Class 4A Wrestling Championship at 155 pounds. Baseball was already carrying him toward a national reputation, but wrestling revealed something important about the athlete underneath it. McDowell was not defined by one field, one position, or one kind of competition. The draft followed him for several years. In 1981, the St. Louis Cardinals selected him in the January draft.
Later that year, the Texas Rangers selected him in the June secondary phase. In 1982, the New York Yankees took him 9th overall in the January secondary draft, and the Toronto Blue Jays selected him later that summer. In 1983, the Minnesota Twins made him the first pick of the June secondary phase. McDowell did not sign with any of them. Instead, he continued developing, eventually playing at Arizona State University in Tempe. That decision kept the major leagues just out of reach for a little longer, but it also gave him another stage on which to establish what he could do. At Arizona State, he wore uniform number 0. It was an unusual number, one that made him easy to identify and gave his college career a visual signature. The number would follow him to Texas, where it would become part of the first impression he made on major league fans. But before he reached the Rangers, McDowell had already performed on an international stage. In 1981, he won a gold medal with the United States national team in the World Games and Intercontinental Cup. 3 years later, he was part of the 1984 Olympic team that won a silver medal. McDowell hit 3 home runs during that Olympic tournament. The 1984 Olympics gave American baseball players a national stage at a moment when the sport was still outside the official Olympic competition that would come later. For McDowell, the tournament added another visible accomplishment to a resume that already included years of draft attention and success at every level he had reached. That same year, at Arizona State, he won the Golden Spikes Award, given annually to the best amateur baseball player in the country. The award carried a clear message. McDowell was no longer simply a talented college athlete with an interesting background. He had become the recognized standard among amateur players in America. The Texas Rangers selected him in the first round of the 1984 Major League Baseball draft, 12th overall. By then, the expectations had been building for years. The Cardinals, Rangers, Yankees, Blue Jays, and Twins had all selected him. He had represented the United States, won medals, starred at Arizona State, and claimed the most prominent individual honor in amateur baseball. When he finally reached Texas, the story was no longer about whether Oddibe McDowell had enough ability to play professionally. The question was how quickly that ability would translate to the major leagues. His answer came on May 19, 1985. McDowell made his major league debut for the Rangers against the Chicago White Sox. He went hitless in 3 at-bats, but he stole a base. It was a small beginning in statistical terms, and it did not announce the player he would soon become. Still, the debut marked the point where years of amateur promise became a major league reality.
For fans in Texas,
The new center fielder had an immediately recognizable profile. He was listed at 5'9" and 165 pounds, batted left-handed, threw left-handed, and wore number 0. The number itself stood out in an era when nearly every player wore something that looked conventional. McDowell looked like a player arriving with his own identity already intact. Then came Arlington Stadium. On July 23, 1985, McDowell faced Cleveland in Texas. The Rangers won 8-4, and McDowell became the first player in Rangers history to hit for the cycle. The achievement requires 4 different kinds of offensive success. A single demands timing and placement. A double requires a ball hit hard enough or placed well enough to take 2 bases. A triple brings speed and opportunity into the same play. A home run finishes the sequence with the most unmistakable stroke in baseball. By the end of that game, McDowell had recorded all 4. The setting mattered. This was not a feat performed anonymously in a minor league box score. It happened in Arlington, in a Rangers uniform, during his rookie season, with the team winning in front of its home audience. The final score sat on the board: Texas 8, Cleveland 4. The new center fielder had given the franchise a first. Think back to what a moment like that looked like in 1985. There was no instant online archive waiting on a phone, no social media feed turning every unusual achievement into a national conversation within seconds.
A cycle lived through the ballpark, the evening broadcast, the next day's newspaper, and the memory of the people who had been there. For a Rangers fan, McDowell's name was suddenly attached to a piece of team history that no one else could claim. The cycle also changed the way his rookie season would be remembered. A player who had started with an 0-for-3 debut had, only weeks later, produced the most distinctive offensive accomplishment in Rangers history to that point. McDowell finished 4th in the American League Rookie of the Year voting. That finish did not make him the league's top rookie, but it placed him among the American League's most notable first-year players. More importantly, the cycle was not the only evidence that he belonged. He had arrived with speed, athletic range, and enough offensive ability to make himself impossible to overlook. The following season gave the Rangers an even clearer sense of what they had. In 1986, McDowell scored 105 runs, 5th in the American League. He hit 7 triples, good for 5th in the league. He played 147 games in center field, ranking 5th among American League center fielders, and recorded 13 assists there, the most in the league. Those numbers describe different parts of the same player. The runs show how often he reached scoring position and came around to score. The triples show how his speed could turn an ordinary ball in the gap into something more dangerous.
The games in center field show that the Rangers trusted him with a full-time role. The assists show that his defensive ability could affect the game even when he was not holding a bat. For a young center fielder, 147 games in the position meant more than a highlight. It meant the daily responsibility of covering the middle of the outfield, reading balls off the bat, and staying in the lineup through the long summer. McDowell was not just being given occasional chances to display his athleticism. Texas was putting him in the middle of its regular operation. In 1986, he also finished among the league leaders in runs and triples while making himself visible in the field. His game had multiple avenues. He could run, cover ground, stretch a hit into an extra base, and contribute to an offense that needed players capable of changing the shape of an inning. The Rangers had drafted him after years of buildup. Now, in his first 2 seasons, he was beginning to look like the investment had been justified. For a while, the future seemed easy to imagine. McDowell was young, distinctive, and productive. He had already given Texas a historic game, and the season after it showed that the cycle had not been a random flash of luck. There was a foundation for a much longer story. That promise carried into 1987 in another form. McDowell's stolen base percentage in the American League was 92.31%, the best in the league.
The number matters because it shows how selective and effective his running could be. Speed alone can produce stolen bases, but successful base stealing depends on timing and judgment as well. When McDowell chose to run that season, he was rarely caught. His early Rangers years had established a recognizable style: pressure on the bases, range in center field, and the possibility that any well-placed ball could become a triple or a scoring opportunity. For anyone who watched baseball in the 1980s, this was the part of a young player's career when projection began to turn into expectation. A rookie season creates excitement. A second season with everyday responsibility begins to create belief. By the middle of the decade, McDowell had already supplied Texas fans with the kinds of memories that make a player feel like he belongs to a particular place and time. But the career still had to hold together. The cycle at Arlington Stadium had made McDowell a piece of Rangers history. The 1986 season had shown what his athletic gifts could look like over a full schedule. His 1987 base running efficiency reinforced the impression that his speed and instincts were real. The next season would test whether those qualities could carry the career forward. In 1988, McDowell's season was described as disappointing. The source does not give one specific reason for that decline, and there is no need to invent one. Baseball careers can turn on a complicated combination of performance, opportunity, timing, and organizational decisions. What is clear is that the Rangers no longer saw the same forward path they had seen during his arrival. On December 6, 1988, Texas traded McDowell to Cleveland. Jerry Brown and Pete O'Brien went with him. The Rangers received Julio Franco. For McDowell, the trade ended the first and most recognizable phase of his career. Texas was where he had worn number 0, hit for the cycle, played in everyday center field, and become one of the most visible young players in the organization. Cleveland represented a new beginning, but it also meant that the player who had seemed connected to the Rangers' future was now part of someone else's plans. That is one of the quiet turning points in a baseball career. The player is still in the major leagues. The uniform changes, the surroundings change, and the statistics continue. But the meaning of the earlier years changes too. What once looked like the opening chapter of a long Rangers career now becomes the peak of a period that had already passed. McDowell's time in Cleveland lasted only part of the following season. On July 2, 1989, the Indians traded him to the Atlanta Braves for Dion James. In less than a year, McDowell had gone from Texas to Cleveland, and then from Cleveland to Atlanta.
Each move could be described as a new opportunity, but the sequence also made the larger pattern harder to ignore. He was no longer developing inside one organization that had drafted him and introduced him to its fans. He was moving through different plans, different lineups, and different expectations. The uniforms changed again. He wore number 20 with Cleveland and number 1 with Atlanta. The numbers were small details, but they reflected the larger story. The number 0 that had made his first Rangers years so distinctive belonged to an earlier version of his career. Atlanta gave him another major league setting, but the fit did not last. On March 28, 1991, the Braves released him. That same year, Arizona State inducted McDowell into its Athletic Hall of Fame. The timing created a striking contrast. At the college where he had won the Golden Spikes Award and worn number 0, his accomplishments were being permanently honored. In professional baseball, his path had become uncertain. The two realities could exist at the same time. The recognition he earned at Arizona State did not disappear because his major league career had become unstable, and the instability of the professional years did not erase what he had done before reaching the majors.
For fans who came of age with baseball in the 1980s, this was a familiar tension in a different form.
A player could be remembered through one season, one team, one uniform number, or one game, while the rest of his career continued somewhere outside the center of attention. In McDowell's case, the memory of the Rangers' young center fielder remained vivid even as his professional path became harder to follow. After Atlanta released him, McDowell signed with Baltimore on April 17, 1991. The Orioles released him on July 28th. On March 12, 1992, he signed with California. The Angels released him on May 14th. The dates form a short, unsentimental sequence. Atlanta, Baltimore, California, release. Each transaction is easy to read in a few seconds, but each one represents another change in direction for a player who had once seemed to be moving steadily upward. The source does not identify a single explanation for these departures. What it does show is the loss of continuity. McDowell's major league career had become a series of openings that closed before they could turn into a lasting role. That is what made his story more complicated than a simple rise and fall narrative. His early peak had been real. His speed had been real. His defensive contribution had been real. The problem was that the career no longer provided enough uninterrupted time for those qualities to define him over the long term. By 1993, McDowell was trying to work his way back through the Texas Rangers minor league system. He signed with the Rangers minor league affiliate, the Tulsa Drillers, on July 13th. Tulsa offered a different kind of baseball environment from the one McDowell had known in Arlington during his first years. There was no cycle to announce his arrival, no Rookie of the Year ballot, and no assumption that the next season would naturally belong to him. The task was more direct: play well enough to earn another opportunity. His performance with Tulsa earned him an invitation to Rangers spring training. That invitation brought him back into the organization that had drafted him and made him a major league player. It also gave the return a particular weight. McDowell was not simply joining another team for the first time. He was attempting to reconnect with the place where the most memorable version of his career had begun. There is a difference between returning to a former team and returning to the beginning of your own baseball identity. Texas was the club connected to his number 0, his cycle, his 1986 full-time season, and the years when his future appeared widest. By 1993, the invitation to spring training could not restore those years, but it could give him one more path back to the major leagues. The Rangers did bring him back. During his second time in Texas, McDowell wore number 8. The change was practical, but it also carried a quiet visual reminder of how much had happened since the first time he stepped onto the field for the organization. Number 0 belonged to the young player who had arrived with extraordinary expectations.
Number 8 belonged to a veteran trying to extend his career after moving through Cleveland, Atlanta, Baltimore, California, and the minor leagues. McDowell's final major league game came on August 10, 1994, against Seattle. He had 2 at-bats and no hits. There was no cycle at the end, no new franchise record, no dramatic final achievement documented in the source. His last line was brief: 2 at-bats, no hits, and the close of a major league career that had begun 9 years earlier with a stolen base against the White Sox. Baseball endings rarely arrange themselves according to the importance of the beginning. A player can arrive with medals and awards, announce himself with a historic game, and still leave through an ordinary box score. The final appearance does not rewrite the first one, but it can make the distance between them impossible to ignore. McDowell finished with 715 major league hits, 74 home runs, and a .253 batting average. He played for the Texas Rangers, Cleveland Indians, and Atlanta Braves. The career spanned 1985 through 1994, though the major league seasons were interrupted by the moves and releases that separated one opportunity from the next. Those totals are modest beside the expectations attached to his amateur career. They are also more than a footnote.
7 major league seasons, a Rookie of the Year finish, a historic cycle, a productive 1986 campaign, and years spent trying to remain part of the game form a career with real substance, even if it never developed into the long run many people imagined. And the connection to baseball did not end with his final at-bat. Arizona State had inducted McDowell into its Athletic Hall of Fame in 1991, and the university retired his number. In 2011, he was inducted into the National College Baseball Hall of Fame. The honors point back to a part of his story that professional baseball could never take away. Before the trades and releases, before the short contracts and the return through Tulsa, McDowell had been one of the most accomplished amateur players in the country. The medals, the Golden Spikes Award, the Olympic home runs, and the number 0 at Arizona State were not merely signs of what he might become, they were achievements in their own right. As of 2025, McDowell was in his 11th year as head coach of the MacArthur High School varsity baseball team in Hollywood, Florida. That detail brings the story back to where it began, Hollywood, Florida, and the high school where McDowell had first been known as a multi-sport athlete. The professional career had taken him across major league cities and through several attempts to find stability. His later work brought him back into a setting where the game could be taught, shared, and carried forward.
The player who once wore number 0 for Arizona State and Texas became part of the baseball life of the same community that had produced him. His story was no longer only about how many seasons he spent in the majors or what his career totals looked like. It also included the institutions that remembered him, the honors that preserved his accomplishments, and the players who encountered the game through him. So how did Oddibe McDowell's career become so much shorter and more fragmented than his early reputation suggested? The source supports a clear answer, even without assigning one hidden cause. McDowell's promise was validated before he reached the majors, and his first years in Texas produced genuine success. But after a disappointing 1988 season, the Rangers traded him. Cleveland moved him to Atlanta the next summer. Atlanta released him in 1991, and brief opportunities with Baltimore and California did not become lasting major league roles. His return through Tulsa and Texas extended the story, but it could not recreate the beginning. The career changed shape before the talent stopped being meaningful. That distinction matters. McDowell was not simply a prospect who failed to reach the majors. He reached them and left behind memorable evidence of what he could do. He was not merely a one-game curiosity, because his 1986 season showed everyday production in center field, on the bases, and in the lineup.
And he was not defined only by the disappointment of 1988, because the years before and after it contained accomplishment, adaptation, and repeated attempts to remain in professional baseball. The most accurate memory is the complete one. Remember the young center fielder in Arlington, wearing number 0, moving through a cycle that made him the first Ranger to accomplish it. Remember the 105 runs and 7 triples in 1986, the 147 games in center field, and the league-leading efficiency on the bases in 1987. Then remember the trades, the releases, the changing uniforms, the Tulsa comeback, and the final 2 at-bats against Seattle. McDowell's career did not become the long, uninterrupted ascent that his amateur resume seemed to promise. It became something more uneven, a bright beginning, a real peak, a series of breaks, and a return to the game through memory, recognition, and coaching. That is why Oddibe McDowell deserves to be remembered beyond the cycle. The cycle was the moment when the future seemed to arrive all at once. The rest of his career showed how difficult it can be to hold on to that future once the path begins to divide.